When I finished college, I went into Peace Corps and I went into Bangladesh for 2 years. And there I was a science teacher for grades 6, 7, 8. And basically I had to create my own curriculum. They did have a syllabus and kind of a textbook. The textbook was in Bengali. And I never did learn how to read Bengali. I managed to teach in Bengali, sort of. But I'd like to experience being overseas and a challenging designing activities with a limited set of materials, because in Bangladesh there was hardly anything. There was hardly even anything to recycle. You could barely get kids that bring in tin cans because they used the tin cans for everything. So I left Bangladesh, went to graduate school, wasn't doing too well in graduate school. And while I was in graduate school, I read a magazine article about new math, and in a footnote it said something about the African primary mathematics program and science program. And when I left Notre Dame after the first year, I contacted someone at EDC, Charlie Walcott, and I went up there and talked to him. I said, I'm interested in this African program. I'd like to go back overseas, but I still want to get a master's in science education. So he said, well, we don't have people working in the African program right here, but there is a program called the Elementary Science Study, and they happen to be looking for people with a chemistry background. And he hired me on the spot. It was one of those steps in life that I look back on now that kind of changed my life. Because then I moved to Boston from Baltimore. Spent a year and a half there, and then went over to Kenya. I worked in Kenya for 2 years, developing curriculum. And Kenya sort of was like the Peace Corps in that there are very limited materials. Man, there's hardly anything. The schools had no budget for science. Whatever you did had to be from the local environment, which was a great discipline. A great discipline. I remember one time I was visiting a school and I was looking at the rooftop. It's made out of grass thatching, because this was a school that had mud as walls, mud on the floor, and grass thatching on top. And I was looking at the grass and I said, where did grass come from? It comes from all areas, and it grew in a lot of African countries, at least many of them that we were working with, because the program involved 7 English-speaking countries. And I realized that if you took the grass, had the kids bring it in, you got some pins, you could do construction activities with them. And that was one of the units that I developed, having kids build houses and other stuff with pins and grass. And I had them test the houses by hanging cans with a string on it and pouring sand on it until the house broke. Then I built upon that when I came to the museum and had kids build drinking straw houses and test the houses with cups and nails. But particularly at ESS was really a formative experience, because I had people there from MIT, Harvard, Boston University, mainly scientists, and some really good teachers. And it was quite a combination of very creative people who were really trying out all sorts of ideas about science education. It was one of the first major projects in the 60s. But also, I think their approach resonated with my own approach that I had been trying at the African primary science program. They were more student-oriented than content-oriented, if I could say that. And they were interested in having students explore, play around with stuff. At least some of the teachers and some of the scientists, they felt that. People like Philip and Phyllis Morrison, they gave priority to that. Compared to some other programs that got too heavily involved in emphasizing the conceptual development. This is at the elementary level. I think it's still happening. But my approach has been consistently trying to get, first of all, kids playing around with stuff. And then out of that, beginning them getting to think about what's happening, and then having a dialogue with them about what they think is happening and what the scientists describe as happening. And maybe getting them to the point where they understand the scientific conception of it. But I find even nowadays, that's still a ways to go with a lot of the elementary students and middle school students, despite what people say out there. A lot of what people do is premature. But when I left the African program, I wanted to continue to develop curriculum or design activities and all that. And when I moved up to Boston, I couldn't find that because funding for that sort of thing stopped. But I forgot, I was over at MIT talking to someone, and they said, you know, you should go to the Children's Museum and talk to Jim Zion. He may have some work over there for you to do. So I had an interview with Jim. He says, well, you know, we're getting some grants pretty soon, but I needed to work right away. I had a wife and 2 kids. So he sent me to Phil O'Connell. She sat down and says, Bernie, how much money do you need to survive for the next few months? I came up with some figure, and they managed to come up with that until the grant came through. Then I got a slightly higher figure. Not much, but I had work. And it was sort of related to what I wanted to do. So coming to the museum was a total accident.